very pleased to have former Special Branch Officer Mike Norton with us today. He's got information that is all new to me, and I'm somebody who's looked into this over some time with some interest, and I've been fascinated by some of what Mike's been able to tell me, and we want to get this on the record. But before we get into it, Mike, just if you'll give me a few minutes, I just want to address an issue that has arisen as a result of my interviews with William Keys, also former BSAP man. And in the course of that, opinions were expressed that have upset a few people. And so I just want to put on the record that I just want to make it clear that in my mind, the BSAP was arguably one of the finest police forces in the world in its day. I think the BSAP performed magnificently. Unfortunately, something went wrong in the intelligence world, in the intelligence services. And that is where we've run into trouble. And that is what is coming out in the talks that we're having. And I just want to recount quickly an event in my early life. I was still a schoolboy when my dad asked me along to go and see General Patrol, who had just resigned his commission and resigned as officer commanding the Rhodesian army. It was about 1968, and my dad was a friend of the general's, and he took me along, which I'm very grateful for. And Dad wanted to understand better, why he packed it in. And I remember sitting there with General Patrol, and he explained very articulately that he had run into problems politically. He did not like the way the ruling party and Ian Smith the political direction the country was going. And he felt conflicted, and he felt he could no longer loyally serve the government of the day. And to my mind, he did the honorable thing. He'd come to that conclusion, and he handed in his resignation, and he went off to grow apples in Inyanga. Now, to my mind, that is what a lot of other people in the services should have done. I think there were a lot of people who were similarly disaffected, who were concerned about the political leadership, and they disagreed with what was happening, but they should have made the choice. If they were going to continue as civil servants, they'd sworn an allegiance to the government of the day, and they had an obligation to fulfill that. And unfortunately, I think quite a few people broke that oath of loyalty, and they did so because they felt that their primary allegiance was to the United Kingdom. And I think that's where we did run into trouble. I don't know who these individuals are specifically, but I think that was an issue that plagued our prosecution of the war. And I think these people did, at critical times, let the forces down. And I think they did an enormous amount of damage. But I'll say no more other than that, that's my feeling on the subject. So having said my piece, I want to hand it back to you, Mike, and just tell us a little bit about your early life and how you ended up where you did.
Okay, Honest, thank you. I was born in Zambia, actually, or Northern Rhodesia as it was, and then when I finished school in 1970, my folks emigrated to Salisbury, as it was. Zambia wasn't a great place in those days, and my father had an agricultural machinery business, so he actually moved that down and joined up with the John Deere people in Salisbury. Mm-hmm. So I ended up going to Gweeby because I thought that was a good thing at the time. And it was the most fantastic 2 years of my life. I believe it or not, I got a diploma. But we had wonderful time, rugby and being stupid. So came call-up time, and there was days, just at the days when national servicemen were being called up into the police. So I got my call up to go to the police, as did many of the Gweeby guys. Went in for recruit briefings and whatever before we actually joined. And of course, the police try to recruit regular members, and the spiel was good, more than double the pay, better equipment, all that sort of stuff, proper rank, that sort of thing. So quite a few of us joined as regulars. We're now talking 1973, sort of October 73. My first posting after depot was uniform branch in Bulawayo, in the control room, which was very interesting. Actually, I was quite junior to be in the control room, but that all went along fine. Then I got a posting to Binga, because having brought up in Zambia on a farm, the bush obviously was more interesting to me. And turned out that there was, in Binga at the time, was Zulu Troop, the South African signals listening device, a branch. They had big antenna there across, and would listen across the lake to all the Zambian, and in fact right up into Angola and everywhere, the military traffic.
Right.
Because I spoke a bit of Afrikaans, having been at school in South Africa, it helped with the thing. So I spent a couple of months in Binga, which was fine. And then I got transferred to Mtoko. Once again, uniform branch, but that didn't last long, because the war then had just started to come into Mtoko. At the same time when Centenary happened a bit later, obviously Mtoko started to hot up.
Right.
And I was posted to Kotwa, which is a little place. In those days, it was a dusty roads camp, halfway between Mtoko and Nyamapanda. In those days, what we were called ground coverage teams.
Yes. And
there were, I think, 5 of us posted there, and we scouted all around that particular area, and got to know the place well and all the rest of it. And actually the 5 of us spent about, working at 14 months there, which was good, because we really had a good picture of that area. And it stayed reasonably quiet until the last 2 months, when quite a big incursion came in from Mozambique, south of the road, Nyamapanda Road. But because we knew about it quickly, it was actually 4RR from Matari came down, and I think most of that group were eliminated within 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it was a point of being in one place for some considerable time, which, going back to your comments, was one of the problems that I found with intelligence gathering. People were shunted around too much, too quickly. I mean, my posting at Binga, you couldn't do more than 4 months in Binga, because that was regarded as madness. But you'd gone absolutely bush happy by then, which was nonsense, which is why I was moved after 4 months. If I'd stayed in Binga longer, obviously I would have got to know the area a lot better. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what happened. I think they actually forgot about us in Kotwa, because we were so out of the way there. So we just stayed there. Anyway, we had this good success. Unfortunately, I lost one of my colleagues in an ambush when he was visiting a source. Or was one of the dangers of intelligence work. He actually went out to meet a very good contact he had in the late evening. Unbeknown to him, the contact had been turned. And when he debriefed the guy said to him, don't go this way, the way that you normally go out of here, go the other way, because they might be waiting for you. It was an absolute setup. And Bruce Baker was killed in the ambush with his detective sergeant. So that was a very good lesson to all of us. That group subsequently were contacted, and most of them were eliminated. And it turned out that his source, who had turned, then was regarded as so unreliable that the insurgents actually murdered him as well. So I guess a bit of justice comes along in there. Anyway, Kotwa was fine, and then I got posted to Beatrice, because there had been some inklings of some movement of insurgents into the southern part of Harare, or the sort of Salisbury South area. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing there at that particular point. There was no patrolling, there was nothing. And I was the first ground coverage guy to go to to Beatrice. And it happened right at the time when, I forget, it was forget the op now, but they picked up intelligence in Mozambique, where indicated there was a group going to the south of Salisbury. Nobody knew why, but it was worth looking into. I hadn't been there very long, about 3 months or so. And we did, in fact, detect a group early one morning with a source we'd planted on one of the farms. And he reported that they'd been there that night, slept there, fed there, and they were now had moved across the main Beatrice Road early in the morning. We obviously, we scrambled everything, got everybody moving, and we were joined by the BSAP Black Boots, the support unit. Again, a very good unit, as you say, of the BSAP. Followed these guys through into the Mondoro TTL. But unfortunately, a fleeting contact happened there. And we didn't have air support at that particular time. And these guys bombshelled. But they did drop a lot of their stuff, and they had a lot of explosives with them. And we then discovered from notebooks and things that their whole intention was to blow up Lake McIlwain, as it was, now Lake Javera, which of course would have been a disaster. Mm-hmm. I spoke to an engineer after the thing, a water engineer, and he said, well, they would have been very lucky to do anything but superficial damage, because apparently that wall is very strong. But the point is they would have made a bang, mm-hmm. and everyone would have woken up. Mm-hmm. So that's what happened in that particular instance. I then did my 3 in the police, and I toyed about whether staying on or not. And then SB headquarters got hold of me and said, look, we'd like to transfer you over to SB permanently, whether you stay on as a regular or whether you become an attached reservist. So I said, fine, okay, and I took the choice and became an attached reservist, because I actually wanted to do a little bit of farming as well if I possibly could. What I then did is I actually moved to the Enterprise area mm-hmm. in late '77, which an area you know very well, and started working in that area as a reservist, probably 3-4 days a week. Not my farmer employer wasn't particularly pleased with me at that point, but he got used to it, and I started sculling around in that area because there'd been very little work done on the ground, because Goromonzi, the headquarters of that area, is well to the south. The northern area, north of the Motoko Road, had been left a little bit almost like a bubble that nobody really cared about. And I discovered that there was definitely things going on in that area, and starting to put an intelligent picture together. The Mangwende, if you remember, off to the west of Enterprise and the long Chikwaka TTL, which runs up and down the farming area, was essentially liberated territory. Marewa police station was there. Now and again they had a bit of a military presence, but essentially that whole area was insurgent heaven. They called it an R&R area. That was the way they termed it. Then on February '78, the first farmer in Enterprise was ambushed on the Shamba Road. It was exactly 23 kilometers from Harare's boundary. Mm-hmm. Ineffective ambush late in the evening, but the reaction from Goromonzi was so slow that they arrived about midnight. The farmer was well into his whiskey at that point, so we had to wait till the next morning to go down the road to give him to indicate to us where he'd actually been shot at. We found the position, found some cartridge cases and whatever, and then followed, the trackers got going, followed it into the Chinnamora TTL that runs on the eastern side of the Enterprise farming area. But cattle had been driven over the tracks as usual, and that was the end of that. But I then spoke to my then boss at SB headquarters, Danny Stannard, and said, look, this is crazy. We need a base in this particular area. And also the uniform branch officer in charge of the district, a very, very good uniform bomb policeman called Dave de Berg Thomas, who sadly is late now. And he was 100% behind it. Quite often we found the uniform and non-uniform special branch, there was some tussling more on egos and things like that. You know, I'm senior to you in rank and whatever, so what are you doing? But these two guys got on immensely well. And Enterprise Base was established at Enterprise Club in the manager's house. The troops we had there and all the rest of it used to bunk either in the house or in the clubhouse itself, which was ideally suited. It meant we had catering facilities. It meant we had, you know, the whole club was fenced, had a secure area to operate from. So it really was a bit of a little win-win situation there. Mm-hmm. Initially, we were told basically we had to run the place ourselves. We were not going to get too much help from outside. So the local farmers obviously became the initial troops operating in the area. Mm-hmm. We used to get a few sticks from Darwindale, Beatrice, and Goromonzi. But as things hotted up all over the place, that didn't happen. So all the guys who were on call-up, subject to call-up with the army, were told, right, fine, you live in this area, you now serve in your home area.
Right.
And that's how Enterprise built up its little military force, if you like. So we had some ex-SAS guys, ex-SLU scouts, all sorts of things. So we had some very effective operators. Fortunately, as I think I mentioned to you before, each area had an area coordinating committee, which was the farmers contributing to the defense of the area. The first thing obviously was the Agric Alert, which was based on every farm, and roll call was done twice a day. And in fact, the Agric Alert saved many people from things. I'm sure you remember the whole thing, funny little grey box with a telephone on top of it. And from the area coordinator, we were able to buy 18 motorcycles, scrambler motorcycles, brand new Yamahas, had them painted camouflage, all the rest of it. And that was essentially our reaction force, which was extremely effective and fast. Then managed to buy a couple of armored trucks, then judiciously scrounged from the Air Force some Browning machine guns, etc., etc. So we built up quite an effective little force. And you know, over that period of time, sort of from the first ambush in early 78, right through to probably, certainly late 78, we handled the whole defense of the Enterprise area and the tribal trust lands on either side of them ourselves, completely ourselves, and had some big successes. Mm-hmm. Just to go into another, we had a very determined guy from Goromonzi. His name was Mike Cullinan, a very good party stick leader. You probably remember Mike. We picked up some information in the Masana that there was definitely a reasonable sized group operating around a big hill, not far off the main Shamba Road. He got up there with his stick. It was a hell of a trudge up there. And he sat there for 8 days, building a picture of what was going on below him. By the 8th day, the guys were drinking their drips. And he came up with a whole pattern for us to mount an attack on this whole thing. And I remember we didn't have aircraft at that particular point. We were doing it all by ground. Mm-hmm. We did the whole plan, and you know how things happen. We were just getting organized for this thing, first light in the morning, and I'd called one of the other call signs on the frequency we were using, which is also used by the Air Force. And out of the blue came a call from a chopper pilot I knew very well, Ian Henderson, saying, "Oh, are you guys have got a bit of a problem?" And I said, "You will. We haven't a problem yet, but yes, potentially we've got a good problem coming." He said, "Well, we're on our way to Matoka, but we're empty." I said, "Well, that's good. Is it just you?" He said, "No, we've got a complement of 1K car and 4 G cars." So I said, "Well, can you pull in, please?" And he said, "Fine, we're about 8 minutes out." And in they came. And of course, that changed the whole picture. We killed 11 of 12, mainly because we had the air power. But I'll just mention something here when we're going to talk about actual Operation Enterprise, which was the whole battle for Salisbury. The first proper information we got was from one of the notebooks from that contact.
Right.
which clearly outlined a Salisbury detachment, which was what ultimately became the problem we faced in Op Enterprise. So that's a bit of a background, Hannes, as to how the whole thing sort of built up and how Enterprise built up and
okay, so
how
Mike,
we got the whole thing.
At this point, you obviously gathering a lot of information, a lot of intelligence coming in, you're sending it on up, but you're not getting a very satisfactory reaction. Is that right?
Well, it was funny because we did a every evening if we could do it, we did a sit rep which detailed what had happened that day and what was likely to happen and what we felt where there was presences here and all the rest of it. And on quite a few occasions we produced very definite information, and we were just told, we'll follow it up yourselves. We did, but the result, the difference being, normally we'd get 1 or 2 kills. With air power, it obviously multiplies. Now, we never got the support of that air power, although we were probably one of the busier areas. The other thing is, look, I'm in limited air force, as you well know. And the guys were working externally and all the rest of it. But, we were essentially left to operate on our own. And I didn't feel, and nor did my colleague in Bandura, because we had common boundaries, that we were really being listened to. And that, but the attitude, whenever I went into because I used to go to terrorist desk in Old Railway Avenue and the 3rd floor and, pop in and see the guys and whatever. And they'd say, oh, God, just keep going. You're doing a good job there. You're holding it nicely. That's fine. I'm glad you're doing that. Keep it going. Like, in other words, we're not hearing what you're saying, but we reckon that you can just carry on keeping it going the way you can, which is it's silly. But as we started to pick up more and more definite information, a couple of things happened in both SB headquarters and in ComOps. Some of the older British-born senior officers reached retirement or reached sort of posting out back into administrative roles and whatever. And younger guys came in who probably, I think, were more in tune with the situation on the ground and were prepared to put their necks out. I mean, when the man I'm speaking about is Danny Stannard. Now, there's many stories about Danny Stannard, but my personal issue with Danny, he was a huge support, not only to Enterprise, but to a lot of other places that fell under his command at that point. To the extent where he said, look, you guys are operating these motorbikes wonderfully and all the rest of it. I've got some SAS guys slightly wounded who taking a bit of a break, but they still need to do their call-ups. Can I send them to you? We said, absolutely. We said, many troops as we can get. And he said, by the way, could you send a truck in to the armory on a Wednesday and see so-and-so at the armory? And we said, yeah, sure, thanks. Sent a truck in. It arrived back at Enterprise. It was full of very good condition Eastern Bloc weapons, RPDs, AKs, SKSs, all sorts of things, and a lot of ammunition. On the basis that he'd worked out that on the motorcycles, the long FN rifle can sometimes be a bit of an encumbrance. And he said, arm your guys with this. And I said, what do you want me to do with the SKSs? And he said, well, up to you entirely. This is your cash. And so what we did with those, we distributed those to farmers' wives because it's a very effective weapon for that. It's only a 10-round magazine, but still, it was a very, very good weapon. So we had our own little sort of thing, and Danny was a huge support. And he also, I felt he started to listen to me as well, in that he would come out with the other officers never had. He would come out and we'd chat and sit and talk and point things on the map and say, this is what's happening, all the rest of it. So, I think a change of leadership there did make a difference. I noticed a difference from that change of leadership time, certainly in the people I was reporting to.
Right. Mike, when did things start escalating? I mean, you could obviously see that something was brewing, but then it really did happen.
Well, the biggest thing was what really triggered everything and got everybody awake was the attack on the fuel depots in November 78. We had reported that there were going to be targets in Harare hit, but we didn't. I've got to admit, we didn't have specifics. We had things like strategic targets, schools, cinemas, that kind of thing. So that information was flowing into Salisbury, to the hierarchy for probably 2 months before the actual event. And then that event happened, which everybody's seen and reported on and whatever. And what always astounded me when I we obviously heard about it, we could see it from Enterprise, we could see the smoke and everything. And as the information fed back, we all said, oh, geez, that must have been a hell of an attack. What about all the guys defending the place? To find out it was some African constables were defending the place with greener shotguns. And we always thought that is really weird. A strategic target like that should have been protected properly, but it wasn't. Maybe it was overconfidence, but maybe it wasn't. I don't know. You've sent me quite a few things with some interesting theories on that, on the whole thing. So that really got the bubble going. The other one then was Keith Samler took over at ComOps as a special branch officer at ComOps. And he immediately showed a lot of interest. And I don't know if I can show it to you. This is the original briefing document that he did.
Let's hold it up, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
The original top secret briefing document that Keith did to ComOps to show what he felt the threat was, the looming, as he called the looming threat. Which was a very, very interesting. Now, Keith used to come out and visit us with his deputy Martin Powers as well, and he said, "Well, we're going to do a briefing to ComOps in about 3 weeks' time. Could you and your colleague in Bandura please put a detailed current report down using every source you can lay your hands on." Every event that you know of possibly happening, and we're going to brief ComOps on this. I had a similar request from T-Desk at Railway Avenue, because essentially we sort of had two reporting channels, and they asked for the same thing. So we did the same report and sent the same report to both people. T-Desk were the first to go and brief ComOps. They played the whole thing down. Said those guys have got it under control. We feel there's a bit of, they may be reporting things here that may be not quite correct, or the rest of it. And Keith said he was astounded. So he leapt in, and he was senior, and said, "No, hang on, this is what the true story is," and put the whole picture on the table as he's done in this document here. And I mean, the numbers he says is frightening. I mean, he said in the area around there, we were between 1,000 and 1,500 insurgents, which is an awful lot.
And this is close to Salisbury.
Yeah, yes. But why T-Desk Railway Avenue didn't report it that way, I don't know. To this day, I asked many questions, but were told, I just didn't get any clear answers on the whole thing. Then what happened fortuitously, Hilary Squires was a friend of quite a few farmers he was the Minister of Law and Order at that point. Defence, yeah, that's it. Yeah. He got the ear of a couple of the farmers who, I was always fairly clear to the farmers. I would give them clear information on a weekly briefing, because they effectively were the troops anyway. And I didn't hold back. I said to him, "Look, guys, we've got a problem there." And they told Hillary this whole thing one day over presumably a couple of drinks and whatever. He happened to tell Ian Smith, and the next thing, things started really happening. I got a call from Keith to say that, right, you and my colleague from Bandura and a few other people, we need to get you in to get this whole briefing fine-tuned on the maps and all the rest of it. And in 4 days' time, we're doing a briefing for an operation that's going to be within this sort of general area. So we thought, okay, fine. What are we going to get? We're probably going to get support unit. We're probably going to get this, probably going to get that. Knowing how we, you know, sort of the whole thing and run. But the moment we got together with Keith and started putting the plan, it became clear now that this was not going to be a half-hearted reaction, because the army officers came in, RLI came in, the MI military intelligence came in. I always thought it's a misnomer, actually. Military intelligence doesn't sort of ring true, does it? But there were some good guys in that. And we put this whole briefing together, and on one Wednesday evening, we went to KG6, what's now Josiah Tongogara Barracks, KG6 Barracks, and there sat the biggest collection of brass I've seen ever, I think. Everything from the police to special branch to internal affairs to the army to the Air Force, and a full briefing was done, very like an external operation briefing. It was totally under wraps, top secret, and we were allocated 7 companies of troops. The main fire force operation was going to be one of the first of the jumbo fire force, which is 2 K cars and 8 G cars, and essentially a double fire force. The troop, they were going to be manned by 1 RLI, which coincidentally my brother served in at the time. He was a troop medic, and obviously a parachutist. And then we were given 4 companies of 1 RR, 2 companies of artillery in an infantry role, and 1 company of 4 RR. And the whole plan was to basically take the area that we talked about. If you talk about from the edge of Salisbury, Borrowdale, just Chinnamora, Domboshawa area, that whole area, all the way as far as the basically nearly up to Bandura, and then all the way around to the eastern side, which would have been the Chipaka, up to into the Mangwende as well. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, we were also allocated 2 troops of SLU scouts. Captain Rick Passaportis was in command of them, and he had the very cushy posting of Borrowdale Country Club, a place I visit now almost weekly. It's quite astounding, but that's where he was based. But he put troops into Chinnamora and into the Mangwende as on the pseudo role, which of course was enormously effective. We'd carefully chosen where the OPs, there was no patrolling anymore. We said, if we patrol, we'll blow this whole thing wide open, and it'll be so. The guys had to walk in overnight into strictly observation posts in the areas we reckoned were the good, and they did it very successfully. They did it very well. There was the odd little punch up during the night where they actually literally bumped into people, but essentially it all went pretty well. A couple of guys got slightly off where they shouldn't have been. And we had to move them then the next night, but everything went into place. So on the morning of the start of enterprise in April, I think it was the 9th, was it? Yeah, the 9th of April. All those observation posts were in point, and if my memory serves me right, we had 39 sets of eyes looking over the whole area. Wow. Early in the morning on the start, the RLI TAC HQ, Tactical Headquarters, arrived at Enterprise, set up on the golf course and in the trees around there. The mobile resuscitation unit was Major Dr. Cliff Webster arrived. The headquarters element arrived. The Air Force support arrived with all their fuel and all the rest of it, and their very comfortable beds and their Batmen. You know how the Air Force lived. And then that the whole thing got going. The first complement of helicopters came in at about 9, and settled down, and that was the half complement of them. Major Freddie Watts, Colonel Ian Bate was in charge of the whole operation, based at Enterprise. Major Pat Armstrong was his 2IC. Major Fred Watts who was one commander. It was his commander, and he was therefore obviously the commander of the actual troops on the ground. he didn't arrive until a bit later, and I'll tell you what happened when it was quite entertaining in a way. The OPs all got into place and immediately started to produce information. Small sightings, odd activity, feeding going on, all the typical examples. And it came from all the areas. So we'd been right. There's no question we'd been right about what was happening. And the first real proper sighting we got was in the Mangwende, a scouts troop had confirmed sighting of 15, based below the hill they were on, sitting around in the sun, having, as I said to you, the R&R area. So that was perfect. Now, Freddie hadn't arrived yet. He was still at New Serum. So we got news to him quickly that we needed the rest of the fire force in a big hurry. So he literally arrived in his town kit in the 1K car, ran to didn't even run to the tent. He ran to because his tent wasn't up yet. He ran to the ops room, threw off his town kit, threw on his camouflage, and in the troops went to the choppers, and the whole jumbo fire force went off to the sighting in the Mangwende. Well, absolute surprise was absolute, and 14 out of 15 on that first day. On the first day, we also had, obviously being so close to Salisbury, the fixed wing aircraft, the Lynxes and the Dakotas. For them, it was about 4 minutes flying time to us. So they were all based there. We got the Lynx up, obviously, at the time. And just as things were getting a little bit dark, a Patu stick, who was in the south, more towards the Goromanzi area, had a contact with a group. A little bit fleeting, and so we just sent the Lynx overhead to see if he could locate. And he did manage to pick up a bit of gun firing coming up at him. And he threw in a couple of Frans and some rockets, and got quite a bit of return fire. But then it was getting dark then, and he had to go back. So in that first day, we'd achieved kills and we'd achieved another contact, which we had no idea what the result was at that particular point. So, I mean, if anything justified our planning and everything else, that definitely did. And I mean, in Bates, you read his introduction. One of the things he made a point of in that was the clear and active intelligence that he got for this particular operation, why it worked so well. Because for once, first time or certainly internally, a major force was put to back up credible intelligence, which I think, if it happened in many other cases, would have been a different ball game. But given the restrictions on the number of aircraft we had and all the rest of it, wasn't always possible. But interesting enough, during this whole time now, of course, what I need to mention is when was it? October 78, Fumarevan, the spear of the nation, Musarewa's locally trained troops, had been pioneered and inserted into the Masana tribal trust land, not very far, but 7 k's to the north of us. And we were the initial liaison people for Max and his group. Max was a genuine turned and former guerrilla, and was himself a bit of a wild boy, but he was brave. That I can vouch for. A few of his lieutenants were okay, but the rest were essentially rabble from the streets of Salisbury, who had been almost press ganged into the slot. One advantage that my guys always did say is that it provided the insurgents with a nice soft target, so that they could actually, they were hit often, because they were pretty much a soft target. But just to come, there was another big, what do they call them, SFA, Security Force Auxiliary Base, Fumarevano, in the Chinnamora, run by a colleague of mine in Special Branch, Hans Sitter.
Yes.
And Hans was a very effective fellow. He really had a good operation in near the Domboschau, which is now the Domboschau Township. And they got attacked one day in January. and actually fought back very, very hard. And they were attacked by a force of about 60, I think, and really fought back. Okay, they'd been pretty well equipped and they were well entrenched and stuff like that. And they killed 4 or 5, wounded quite a few more, and put the rest to flight, with only 2 wounded on the former Ravano side, which was good stuff. So it was not all bad. I mean, I know there were areas, other parts of the country where entire security force auxiliary had to be eliminated because they'd gone rogue. I think a big hats off to the liaison officers who worked and were sat with these guys. If you had a good guy running them, they generally ran pretty well.
Yeah. I ended up with them for about 3 months, actually. Same thing, and it was starting to work. But Mike, just talk more about that fire force operation, how it unfolded, and I don't know how many kills were actually made in the course of that operation. I know it was quite intensive.
It was very intensive. Before we go into that, just I'll mention one more thing quickly, which had been on the cards for a long time. Police Reserve Air Wing, who you remember well, were essentially, farmers, doctors, whatever, all with their own aircraft, all very keen to help, but had been restricted until late in '78 to essentially courier duties. Dave Perkins from the Armory finally got permission to arm these aircraft. Many Cessna 206s, 182s, took a door off, made a special mount for a Browning machine gun. And all of a sudden, these poor aircraft became little mini gunships. Look, they weren't, I mean, there's nothing like a K car. But I tell you what, given what they did, when we didn't have air support, it was like a 50% improvement. In having something in the sky that can actually shoot back. So I'm just mentioning they were also involved in op enterprise as well in quite a big way, because as I'll relate here, as things got really busy, the fire force had to be split into 1 K car and 4 G cars, and 1 K car and 4 G cars, and often went in different directions because of the number of sightings that were happening. I'm just going to look at my notes here quickly. It became pretty hectic, so it's actually quite difficult to remember. Right, I've got it here. Told you about the partridge stick in the south near Goromonzi. Well, the next morning the fire force went in there, and funny enough, the insurgents had remained there and started fighting back. We definitely, within the Salisbury detachment, had a different caliber. It wasn't run immediately. They did stand and fight up to a point. Certainly at this stage, they had no idea what was ranged against them. So they obviously thought they're a bit cocky. We've had control of this area. Let's fight back. But once you get enveloped by a full fire force, there's not a lot of you can do. So again, that was kills early in the morning on the second day. And then I'm just looking here. Just going to, it's not an amusing thing, but these incidents happen. Our joint great friend, the late Ian Henderson, chopper pilot, on that particular punch up early in the morning, one insurgent was based to the back of a big gum tree. I mean, those gum trees there got to be damn near a meter across, and he was frustrating everybody by running around the gum tree every time the chopper tried to find him, by going around and around the gum tree and firing it. And he actually did so well that he actually eventually hit Ian on the eyebrow with a bit of shrapnel, and Ian's blood all over Ian's visor, so he couldn't actually fly properly. So he had to actually land, clean himself up, and take off again. In the meantime, a very aggressive Enterprise party stick had decided to flank this guy, so they flanked him on both sides and got him, but not before he'd actually done some damage to an aircraft. So that was the sort of caliber. It wasn't all easy going. Okay, as we carried on, literally the next 5 days, fire force was out from first light to last light. not always on the same scene. Go out, finish one scene, come back, refuel, rearm, go again 4 hours later, and then go again. That the Dakota with the para sticks, we were doing often 2 jumps a day, just in support of the KCOM. I'm trying to think. I remember my brother telling me he jumped twice in one day. But there was a guy called Des Archer. Again, what you remember? Yeah, Des. He holds the world record for the most jumps into combat in one day, which is 3. Yeah. And I seem to suspect it was during this op that he did it.
It could well be, yeah. And his total, I think, is 60 or 70.
79
combat jumps, yeah, which I think is also
resulting in shooting. You know.
I think it is. It's a world record of some sort.
It'll never be broken. Never ever. I mean, a friend of my grandfather who had been at Arnhem. He did 3 jumps in his entire career.
Yeah, I know. And the guy
goes to show.
They were jumping at low level too. Huh?
Yeah,
these were low jumps. Mike,
okay, so you can get an idea of the sort of the pace of things that were happening now. I mean, we were stretched to the limit. I asked Danny Stanley to send me another guy to help me, and Tiny Cooper came out. Plus, we got some more detective sergeants to come and help, because the interrogation of the prisoners, which is of course absolutely vital. What would again, very good working relation with Freddie. When a contact was over and there'd been a capture, one of us would be flown out, get the guy, as we did, we hooded them, brought them in, landed a bit away from everybody, took them into the back of where we were based in our particular office structure, in the manager's house there. And if he was wounded, we'd take him via Doc Webster and get him patched up as much as possible, and then get on with immediate interrogation of what had happened and what the crash RVs were for his group. And any other immediate information that he could pass on to us, and that would go straight back to the ops tent, and we'd either move some OPs around, or we'd be able to alert them to watch a particular area. And in a couple of cases, we actually sent the fire force straight to a particular point, and most of the time we were right. That absolute hot intelligence it's absolutely crucial. The scouts, of course, were loving it as well. We were providing them with lots of recruits from all the captures. And
Rich Supporters was living in.
Yeah, but he was sending them straight to the. Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Yes. We used to find if when we got a slight break, we'd always find an excuse to fly over to visit Passaporters and have a couple of beers. Great. The other thing too, I had an incredibly good source. He actually was a businessman, a black businessman who operated stores in town, but he'd been around for many years, and he had stores all over the sort of area we were operating in. And because where the whole area we were talking about is so close to Salisbury, basically a lot of those people were commuters. Yeah, they went into town for work during the week, sometimes came back. He was an absolute delight. He was a ZANLA supporter, Mugabe supporter, but he saw no reason not to make money. So he would provide us with information, and of course, it was $1,000 a kill. And if weapons beyond sort of AKs and SKSs, there was another $500 onto that whole thing. So it was a very interesting. He was extraordinary. I did hear he did die, but his son still runs his business to this particular day. In the area.
Really, Mike. Yeah. There was that abduction that took place. Who was it that one of the farmers' wives was abducted?
Yeah, that was after Enterprise. Sorry, you answered the question. The formal kill count of Enterprise of those 11 days was 107. Wow. Which for an internal operation is extraordinary.
Yes.
Remembering the normally another 75% sustain injuries that make them no longer 100% effective. So when you take it on that basis, basically we probably got rid of 300 or 400 troublemakers over that particular period. But what they did do, they then, midway through the day, about 5 days, 6 days in the op, we did notice a sudden lull in the sort of area we were covering. They had gone back into the Mangwende on the western side and had been resupplied with fresh munitions and some fresh recruits. But they were nowhere near of the caliber that had been there initially. So when they came back in after about 2 days, the troops noticed a distinct drop in the quality of what we were facing. There was one particular fellow who needs to be mentioned. His name was Big Brain Chiwada, a pseudonym, obviously. That was his Chimarenga name, and he was a real troublesome fellow. He operated sort of in the Domboshawa Christian Bank area, and was really the guy supposed to do the forays into Salisbury with his group. We did detect, in fact, Bordel's SP did detect a guy in a domestic quarters in Bordel. I think it was along the Bordel Road. I can't remember exactly where. And the BSFE SWAT team raided the area. The guy fought back. They had to kill him. But he had a notebook on him detailing a lot of other things. And that's actually where we got absolute confirmation that General Walls's house was a target. They did, in fact, target a house in Gun Hill, who wasn't General Walls's house. It was the Greek Archbishop. So he got an awful fright one night when he was shot at. And interesting enough, just on an aside, Duncan Fletcher, the famous cricketer, he was he lived right next door. So he came belting out in his underpants with his Uzi. He's something who told me the story. And got a real snot squirt from these guys, and he dived back into cover. That was one of the things. Then there were various other targets that were mentioned. You know, cinemas, schools. So had that whole thing, it would have got really out of control. It would have been terrible. I mean, the morale of Salisbury would have been completely and utterly crushed.
Mike, it sounds, listening to you, that the clincher was just very fortunate that Hilary Squires got wind of this and spoke to the Prime Minister, and that triggered the reaction that was required. But if it had stayed at a lower echelon, it sounds like you wouldn't have got the response you needed.
No, we wouldn't have. I think it had to eventually come from high, but I can't stress more. I know Ian Smith obviously did have a big influence on that. But the change in the hierarchy of our reporting hierarchy at that particular end of 78 definitely made a massive difference as well. You know, people I think they got fixated on these external raids because they were big, they were successful, they were all the rest of it, but they were forgetting about the threat that was going right under their noses, which at last was realized.
Mike, I think the same thing applies to the army. There was a lot of dead wood at the highest level there. It's a great pity the younger guys, the young majors and colonels who had combat experience weren't moved up quicker. I actually think one of the great tragedies of our war was the death of Colonel Dave Parker, the RLI commander. It was that kind of guy who really needed to go up to the highest level quickly, because you know, he understood what was going on, and I think we would have been in much better shape with some of the younger officers moving up quicker. And I suspect the same thing applied to the police.
Very, very definitely. But you know, it was still, the structure was the old British system. You know, you had to have so much seniority. You have to, and you know, your next post was this. The fact you were a square peg in a round didn't really matter. It was a case of, you know, it was protecting pensions and all that sort of stuff, which, you know, it limits any effectiveness. I mean, you know, you look at, I mean, my father and my grandmother before, he served in the war. And he told me stories about the days of the Chindits and whatever, when, Ord Wingate, who's a complete and utter maverick, came and sorted out the Burma problem, much to the horror of the senior officer.
Yeah.
Because, but he thought outside the box. And Dave Parker was one of those. That was a great tragedy, that. Great tragedy. Yeah. We had the second wave coming in, if you like, on the sort of from the 6th day thereon. But it was, things definitely started to wind a bit down on that whole aspect. But we kept the whole op going as long as we possibly could, because right on the edge of what was coming was the first multiracial elections.
Yes.
That actually started 2 days after basically Op Enterprise,
Right.
2 days into 2 days before the end of Op Enterprise. The whole idea was to try and keep all those troops in the field over that period. And you remember there was an astounding turnout.
Yes.
And Muzorewa was elected. And I remember him campaigning around the area. The poor old uniform branch of the BSAP had to go and sort out, secure an area, provide trucks to bring the locals to the meeting. We heard this before. A bit more, Muzorewa would address them, and off they went. Yeah, look, but I was shattered. I was actually very shocked at how good the turnout. Look, the people were generally well protected.
Yes.
And they did turn around. I think
it's probably the only free and fair election in the history of the country.
Yes, I think so.
And actually, for what it's worth, the British government certified it free and fair. If you remember, there was Lord Boyd, I think, brought out a team of observers on behalf of Mrs. Thatcher. And they did. They went back and said that was a free and fair election.
And then dear old Maggie reneged on us.
Yes. Yeah. That's right.
Just another interesting point, talking about the election, it was about the time of the election, I forget who there was. Dave Shirley was the pilot, I remember. He was doing a relay change in the Masana. We had 2 relays for the operation up on big Gormort, big mountains. And they had to obviously be changed over with batteries and food and all the rest of it. And he was flying back towards Enterprise. And on one of the roads in the Masana, this big saw down, this very strange fellow was waving, standing in the middle of the road, waving his arms in the air, lying down on the road. And then waving his arms in the air, lying down on the road. And he thought, a bit odd. So he orbited the guy a couple of times. It was in a very clear area. So the guy had chosen the area very carefully. And he thought, well, okay, I don't know what's going on here, but I can't see anything else around. He spoke to his technician and said, let's go in and you jump out and see what's going on with this guy. So he landed, tech jumped out, grabbed this guy, brought him into the helicopter and said, what's the story? He said, no, I'm a guerrilla. I want to surrender. So he said, okay. He said, either this guy's properly mad or he's what he says he is. So I got called, met the helicopter at the bottom of the golf course there, hooded this guy, took him in, and sure enough, he was a section medical officer, which was not particularly senior, but nevertheless. And he just, the Afrikaans expression is hotful. He was sick and tired of being shot at and chased, and he decided, no, I don't want to. I'm giving this up. So he came in, and we were able to, and luckily he'd been separated from his group for a bit, but he was certainly able to provide us with quite a good bit of background information. But the interesting part about the whole thing, I was going to hand him over to the scouts as usual, and I got orders from on high to say, no, he's going to be used in a sky shout. So I said, oh yeah? They said, no, we're going to put him in an islander with the big speakers and all the rest of it. I'd come across that once before in my Kotwa days. And he's going to fly around the area calling for the insurgents to surrender. So I thought, yeah, well, okay, fine. I guess PSYOPs had to justify their job. So about 2 days later, off went the aircraft. And this booming voice went out calling to all the, obviously knew them all by name, or a lot of them by name, calling them by name, come and surrender, and all the rest of it. And I was actually sitting one evening having a beer we always used to have a little mini jock meeting in the evening at the ops tent. I remember Pat Armstrong saying, this is not going to do anything, I can tell you right now. They're going to laugh at this. So I thought, okay, fine, I let it go. The aircraft did another one the next day, got shot at a few times, which made him go a bit higher, and came back, and that was the last we heard of that. And we've discovered subsequently from some other captures that the whole thing had actually backfired 100%. All these guys being called out, names had been called out, section commander, detachment commander, whatever you want, their esteem amongst the people shot right up.
Yeah.
Because now they were known and recognized. Oh, you're important. I mean, the government is calling for you.
Yeah.
It was actually an absolute. So I don't know who thought the scheme up, but they hadn't thought the psyche through. Then what happened on the election day? He was brought out to Enterprise because we had a voting station not 2 farms away from the club, and he was brought out in all nice smart clothes and all the rest of it. Made it quite obvious that he was that's the whole story. There was a whole Herald camera crew with him, that he was a surrendered insurgent, and he went and put his vote for Muzawa. So again, I don't know what effect that had, but it was a bit late in the day to try and influence the voting then. That was on the first day of voting, but whether anybody sort of, by the time the news got out to the rural areas, I mean, the whole thing was over and done with. So yeah, good. That's what once we got to the end, it was 107 confirmed, plus all the other things that went on, and then slowly Fire Force started to, we started to wind everything down, and I remember the last evening the guys were all there. Most of the troops, the RLI, had sort of stayed on while the guys in the OPs were withdrawn steadily and had gone back to their bases and whatever. Look, we had the other thing. We had we had one tragedy which I remember quite well. Is some of the troops, the 1RR guys, had been given former Revanu guides who knew the area well to sort of help them navigate and whatever. And essentially, they said there was no problem with these guys. But I think some briefing guy somewhere made a mistake because he put a partridge stick and a 1RR stick in very close proximity, without clearly defining the area. And when the 1RR stick got up in the morning, the first guy to get up was this SFA guy, who obviously is armed in that SFA uniform that looked a bit like a non-uniform. And he went for a wee, and the partridge stick saw him, and of course AK, all the rest of it, and shot him. And they also unfortunately shot one of the 1RR guys dead as well. So those sort of unfortunate things happen in an operation that's so closely, everyone was in close proximity to each other. But okay, so we started to wrap the whole thing up. The last night, the one commander were there, and the whatever, you can imagine that was one party to remember. The guys really gave it an absolute absolute stick. I mean, it went on that. I think Enterprise ran out of whatever they could be drunk. And we had a guy called Dave Masoki. He was actually a signaller, but had been wounded. So he was attached to us on sort of, we had lots of guys like that attached to us. And he was absolutely brilliant at organizing strippers or topless barmaids to come to the club, unbeknown to all the wives around and all the rest of it. So all the Part 2 guys were in everything. The only thing that happened that night when he went to take, that night I think we had topless barmaids, and ladies they were not. However, what needs must. When he took them back to Salisbury at about 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was, he managed to roll the hyena that he was into the ditch. Luckily, they were all strapped in, so nobody was hurt. So we sent another vehicle quickly, pulled it back onto its wheels, and off Dave went. We didn't know that he'd actually cut himself quite badly on the head and on the knee and whatever. So he then went into Andrew Fleming to get patched up a bit. Of course, he was still a little bit worse for there. And I forget, there was another policeman we knew who happened to be bringing somebody else in there, and he heard this scuffle going on in the cubicle, and went in there to see what was going on. And the matron was beating Dave round the face very hard, because what apparently he'd done in his confused state, he says he'd actually stuck his hand right up the matron's skirt, and she didn't take kindly to that at all. So he got a second beating. Anyway, there were lighter moments on the whole thing. Wonder where Dave is now. But that was a character. And so back to more serious things. Like we sort of wound everything down, and then we were back to looking after ourselves. And obviously with the publicity we'd gotten, and everyone realizing that we actually knew what we were doing, we did get a fair bit of extra help. We were getting support unit, and other people passing through, which was a big help. And it definitely quietened down for about, I would say we probably had 2 months of still activity, but a lot quieter. What I forgot, I missed out with, I was going back to the fuel dump attack. Now, there's a lot of controversy reading some of your articles, who actually was behind the whole thing. I forgot to tell you that the day after the attack, there was a police roadblock always on that Shamva-Matoka Road junction, yes, generally manned by people from police general headquarters. And that second night after the fire, at about, must have been 9:10, saw a vehicle coming down the road, a pickup. I don't know what they assumed. Maybe they assumed it was a farmer going home late or something like that. I mean, obviously it was way curfew, as you know. But because it was a pickup and on a main road, I think they might have sort of thought, look, they weren't trained soldiers or, or whatever, that this was so they allowed the vehicle to come very close to the roadblock, and then it just accelerated through. Before they could even get a shot off, it was gone down the Matoka Road. Obviously, I don't know why the driver did it, but he turned up the road that off the main road that goes towards Arcturus, and came fairly close to a farmer's farmstead who knew something was up. And with the Agric alert, he was able to call me and say, well, what's going on? I said, I don't know what's going on, but there's something not right there. Fire on that guy. So he did. So the vehicle turned around, went back to the main road, and he told us that it now headed off towards Matoka, or towards the end of the enterprise farming area. And we were able to get hold of the farmer there, Owen Connor, and his son, Kevin, who happened to be home from, I think he just finished school. And their house was pretty close to the road, so they were able to sort of double down the 30, 40 meters to the road. And the two of them ambushed the vehicle. It went down the road. They hit it many times. It went down the road and then went into the ditch about 120 meters from where they'd hit it. Look, sensibly, we'd already dispatched vehicles to go and help. Sensibly, they didn't follow. Just the two of them would have been stupid to try and approach the vehicle unaided. But by the time the response got there, the vehicle was no occupants in the vehicle, but there was blood, quite a bit of blood all over the place. And in the back of the vehicle was a British 3.5 rocket launcher, all still together with two rockets, five AKs, and a folding butt. Pretty sure there was a folding butt FN in there as well, sure. Which is interesting. That was unusual to find a folding butt FN amongst this lot.
The rocket launcher.
And the 3.5 rocket launcher. The first time I'd ever seen one of those. I'd seen many RPG-7s and stuff like that, but never the 3.5. That was a proper bazooka. So we now had the vehicle.
British manufacture.
British manufacture. Yeah. We then had the vehicle. Obviously, it wasn't too difficult to try and track the owner driver down, and we managed to grab him. His name is Jeffrey Morewa, and he admitted openly having driven these guys into town. And he said the express, where they told him that their intention was to go and do an attack. So he thought, fine, and he was to wait for them at a particular point. The tanks went up, and Jeffrey obviously worked out what the particular attack had been. He then took them to a house in Mavu, where they all stayed the whole day after the attack. Obviously, logically thinking, if they try to move out too quickly, they'd probably be bust. Moved out the next evening. Now, there's many theories of what happened to those tanks and whatever, but it's quite possible there were no more than one attacking group. But certainly this group that was hit on the road there was definitely part of that attacking on those fuel depot, without question.
I'll tell you, the circumstantial evidence leading one to conclude that something was rotten at the top there is overwhelming. With all this information coming through, you would have thought that a strategic target like that would have been properly defended and guarded. The fact that it wasn't was either gross negligence or it was intentional. And I know there are some people who firmly believe that that there are people in the intelligence circles who actually wanted it to happen to increase political pressure on Ian Smith. And that's another reason why some people believe the Viscounts went down. It was another way of amping up the pressure, destroying national morale, because that was a very demoralizing event. You know, when the fuel storage tanks in the center of the capital are blown up, you know, a lot of people, including myself, starting to think, jeepers, you know, how can we turn this thing around? It's gone too far. It was terribly demoralizing. And there's every reason to believe it could have been avoided if people had been doing their jobs properly.
Absolutely. I mean, that area should have been roadblocked off from, you know, out of working hours. There should have been no access to it.
No.
Anyway, yeah, we can. There's something odd there.
That's very interesting. Mike, there was another schoolboy incident involved in a contact in the Enterprise area. I forget his name.
Voluntary?
Yes.
Yes.
What happened there?
He was. They farmed. There was those small holdings on the Hatcliffe boundary of the Chinnamora,
Right.
and he was actually driving home with his father, I think, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. During Op Enterprise, and they were ambushed, and his father was wounded and he was killed. He was 16 or 17 at that particular point.
Okay.
That was again the sort of result of what their intention was. It was like the second day of Enterprise that actually happened.
Right.
So, you know, again, a sad thing was, but based on the fact that, you know, this is what their intentions were. And I think, you know, had we not stopped them as we did, there certainly would have been schools, certainly Oriel School or whoever knows, Prince Edward, whatever, hospitals, cinemas would have been hit. There's just no question that would have been hit. And that would have been another, you know, and are we talking, did somebody hear about this and then finally take action, or was it going to be left to drift to allow something to happen to try and once again maybe put pressure on Ian Smith, or I don't know, who knows? That's where
my suspicions lie. Mike, just tell us about that abduction. One of the farmers' wives was abducted. I think it was after Op Enterprise, and I know you were involved in trying to.
It was in July of '79, and it was a lady called Mrs. Yvonne Mulligan. She actually was a farm manager's wife on Strathlawn Farm, which is adjacent to the Chikwaka TTL.
Right.
And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a couple of Majibas, I don't know if I should explain. Well, Majibas are a youngster normally running with the insurgents, who's sometimes armed with a hand grenade. He's essentially the eyes and ears of the insurgents, and we used to call them LTTs, locally trained. But basically, essentially that way. A few of them had rifles, but not many. And they were the ones that keep an eye and warn the groups what were happening. They arrived. 2 of them had grenades. Yvonne was a very big lady. So she was called by the gardener to the gate. And these guys were there, and she said, well, what's the story? He said, well, madam, we've got grenades here. If you don't come with us, we're going to show these grenades at you. And you've got to come to meet our leaders. You shouldn't have much of an option. There was no one else around at the time. So she was taken out through the gate, hobbled a short distance, and the guys obviously realized that she was going to be a problem to move a long distance, so they grabbed a wheelbarrow, put her in a wheelbarrow, and headed off towards the tribal trust land on the right-hand side. But they were quite smart about it, because the group split, and one group went off in a sort of northwesterly direction, whereas the smaller group with Mrs. Mulligan went off in a direct east direction. Somebody tried to phone her, I think just out of a social call, and obviously she didn't respond. So I think it was John Cameron, who was on the next farm, went around there to find out from the gardener that she'd been abducted, obviously raised the alarm. We put our motorcycle guys straight onto it, and a brilliant tracker we had, Andy Hartel. He got onto the spoor straight away, but as had been planned, they'd managed to sort of hide the spoor of the wheelbarrow, and he naturally followed the other spoor, and went that way until last light. And then we said to him, look, you're not going to achieve anything during the night, come back. So they came back again. At that point, I got hold of that particular source of mine I'm talking about, and various others, and said, look, I need to know if there's a white woman being taken. We think she's going to the Chikwaka. Is there any indication of movement or that sort of stuff? And I immediately got on to ComOps and we then fell under the JOC was SALOPS, which was essentially a police run JOC in Salisbury. Both of them told them the story and said, look, this is we're trying to do best I can. We're going to use what troops we've got at first light. Please, could we have a second police reserve air wing aircraft to help? And we're going to start scouring the area around. We then worked out from what Andy described on the tracks that he'd followed. We'd worked out in discussion that was not Mrs. Mulligan, because everyone knew there would either be quite heavy footprints or there would be some means of transport. So that clearly was a ruse, and obviously it had worked. So first light the next morning, we got the bikes, then everything into the Chikwaka, patrolling all the way around. Just to describe to you, the Chikwaka TDL is a narrow strip of very sandy, pretty flat. So it's not difficult to patrol on motorcycle. In fact, it's ideal territory for them. And also it's very open. There's a lot of population there, but it's very open. Being reasonably affable, because there's a lot of brick houses, people doing reasonably well, and building themselves brick houses over the years. So we got that all going. Around about lunchtime, one of my sources came back to me and said, yes, there's a woman definitely in the Chikwaka, not sure where, but it's been so busy there with aeroplanes and everything that everyone's just gone to ground. So we thought, okay, fine. What we've probably achieved here is a bit of a settling of the they couldn't move without being seen, and we thought, okay, we've probably maybe contained her within the Chikwaka TTL. Obviously, wires were hot flying between ComOps and us and all the rest of it. And we thought we were just going to have to handle the whole thing on our own. So we put the guys out in ambush on the far side of the Chikwaka that night, on the edge of the river line there, on the Nyakui, in the known crossing places that we knew. But it was strangely quiet overnight. A couple of flares were seen, and it was the odd thing like that, but nothing really transpired. So we were really a bit of a loss as to what to do. We were woken up about 4 o'clock in the morning with a convoy of trucks arriving onto the golf course by the squash courts there. The same RLI TAC HQ, out of the blue, boom, on the ground. Colonel Bate again, Pat Armstrong again. This time it was 3 commando there, who came to be the main troops on the ground. We didn't have any other troops other than RAR were tasked to help in the Mangwende to try and act as a bit of a blocker. Should Mrs. Mulligan be taken across into. Now, I gathered from the Colonel Bate, I said, we didn't expect you, sir. He said, no, this is top priority. We've been told by ComOps, top priority. Morale of the farmers, all that kind of stuff. So obviously somebody kicked somebody somewhere. And we had this whole arrival. That helped a lot because we were able to drop in on a few places that the rest of that day to try and, places we suspected she might be. Had a couple of punch-ups, but with groups not connected, we got a couple of captures, and they said, no, what are you talking about? We don't know anything about this. And it is obviously one specific group that was involved. So that's the first day it went past without sort of too much success. Then that evening, my contact got hold of me and said he's pretty sure that he knows the two possible crawls where the group involved with the abduction are situated. And he says they're in the brick houses. They're living in the houses. So you can't see them from the air and all that sort of stuff. I said, is the woman still there? He says, not sure, but she could well be. So I thought, fine. So that was good. So we had at least a location. Subsequently, pretty early in the morning, the motorbike sticks were out and they had a bit of a punch-up with a couple of Majibas. Shot one and then captured the other one. So that was brilliant. So I hopped across on one of the G cars, grabbed this guy, brought him back, and quickly interrogated him as to what was with Brian Streak, who was the RLI intelligence officer. And we rapidly established that the two crawls where my source had told me they were likely to be were the two. They were in one of either of those. We knew we were pretty much onto the right sort of territory. We had a jumbo fire force again, 2 K cars, 1 G car. Ian Bate said to me, look, I want you in the second K car, because if we get captures on the ground, I need you on the ground rapidly, so we can get information immediately on the whole thing. I said, fine, no problem. It wasn't the first time I've been in choppers many times. And it was being flown by Ian Henderson. So off we trundled, and we split the fire force into two to approach the 2 crawls where we suspected the problem would be. The cannon went off to the one. We had a Dalmatian Alpha fit, the 4-barrel Brownings, which when they worked was a stunning weapon, absolutely astounding weapon, particularly that sort of terrain, because there's not a lot of rocks. It's a real machine. Anyway, we went to the crawl, orbited the crawl, dropped off the 4 stops at the other sort of edge of the crawl, and the commander on the ground told him to start sweeping inwards. We kept orbiting, and as we orbited over the sort of northwestern area of the crawl, quite a big crawl, probably covered 2 acres, with a lot of brick houses. I saw a stick of RLI move up to a house, up to the window. One of them with a grenade in his hand, obviously going to clear the house with a grenade. But for some reason, I don't know what happened, they both looked into the window, and I just saw them fall, cut down. They didn't stand a chance, the poor guys. Anyway, everyone went into cover, backtracked. We came back, pulled out hard over that house, and the Brownings were fired into, the gunner fired the Brownings into that hut, and people just fell out the hut. There was obviously about 15 people in the hut. We then started systematically trying to clear all the other huts. At the same time, we called to the other fire force, which was Major Bruce Snellgar, and said, look, we've hit them, they're here. He said, okay, I'm coming, there's nothing here, where he had gone to. So in the time that he probably took him the 3 minutes, 2 minutes it took him to fly to where we were, we just kept trying to pound the ground to keep these guys under control. One of the RLI sticks called us and said, K2, you're under sustained fire from an RPD. So, and we'd had a lot of cracks going past the aircraft, which wasn't terribly unusual. But he said, no, you're under control. This guy goes and knows what he's doing. He's leading and firing for you. He said, I can't get a bead on him because he's behind a wall. So we asked him to talk us sort of roughly where the area was, and he indicated an area, and we went and we fired into that area. He said, no, he's still going at you. At that particular point, there was bing, dang, bang all around the aircraft. So obviously he was getting good. And at that very moment, the police reserve air wing aircraft above us shouted to us, K2, you're on fire. So I looked out. I could look out because I was in the commander's seat there. I could look out and I could see flames coming out the back of our turbine. And I said to Ian on the intercom, Ian, we're on fire. He said, yeah, I heard. Where is it? The technician also swung his head out and said, we're in fire on the turbine, at the rear of the turbine. And Ian said, okay, I've got to shut down and go down. Now we were quite low because the Dalmatian, the Alpha Fit, works better at a little bit lower than the normal 600, 700 feet with the cannon works at. So we got down a bit lower. Ian had to shut down the motor and started to auto rotate, but we were a bit too low. So we were pretty obvious we were going to take a bit of a smashing. At that particular point, we were hit with a couple more rounds, and we worked out subsequently what happened is a bullet hit one of the barrels of the Brownings, splintered, and hit me on this just above my ear here. Luckily, I had a flying helmet on, skidded around my head and came out here. I didn't know that at the time. It was like being hit by a 14-pound hammer. So I obviously slumped forward. That's what Ian told me that's what I did. And the chopper went in, and we went in hard. The blades came down, broke up, chopped the tail boom off. Typical crash. We were pretty much in the contact area. But I was quite stunned or whatever. But I just sort of opened my eyes and they looked at me as I was, my goodness, he's around, and he's alive. So we crawled out of the chopper. Ian had actually damaged his hands a bit when we'd gone down on the control panel. And a South African pilot, we were still using a South African pilot, we were using South African pilots a lot at that point. He's on his first bush trip, came down and landed next to us amidst all the shouting and shooting and lifted us out. Very, very brave youngster. He was so new to the extent we had to point to the main road for him to fly back towards Enterprise. He's an absolutely youngster, green, but obviously he was going to be a good pilot. We didn't go as far as Enterprise. We landed, because he was short of fuel, we landed at Frascati Farm, which is towards the top of the farming area, where we had a big fuel cache. Landed there, and then the farmers, I got out at that particular point. The farmer's wife, who was a nursing sister, got hold of me and pulled my helmet off and all the rest of it, and discovered it was, it was a gash more than anything life-threatening or whatever. But she did say, look, you could have sustained a skull fracture on this kind of thing. You need to go and have X-rays. So that took me out of that particular battle for that day. But Ian was so incensed about being shot down that he actually went back, trooped back into the contact area as a troopie, as a soldier. Well, the moment Bruce Snellgo heard that there was a highly trained Air Force pilot trying to slog it around on the ground, he ordered him out immediately. So Ian was flown back with a flea in his ear. Then Brian Streak, because obviously Brian Streak then came and took over from me, the RLI intelligence officer, and he eventually got on the ground because they discovered we'd wounded one guy who was lying in the periphery of the contact, and he was able to get to him and get some information. And that guy said, yes, we did abduct this woman, but she's already moved on. She moved on the night before into the Mangwende. And I said, well, how did they do that? He said he wasn't too sure, but he thought that they took her by vehicle. So I thought, my goodness, okay, this obviously was a highly organized thing. But he did confirm that the group that we had hit there was 38 strong. In that particular area. Obviously, the other part of the fire force had come in then, and got going on the ground and cleaning the scene up and whatever. It actually became, sorry, I apologize for my dog behind us. They cleaned up the whole scene. Obviously took the bodies out of the troopies. And then just to make sure that things were really quiet, they actually called in a lynx with a mini golf bomb and actually bombed the area with the mini golf, which is extraordinary. If you've ever seen one of those golf, it's like a little atom bomb. And that quietened everything down for the night. The guys stayed on the ground that next day and until the next morning, and then everyone withdrew, collecting all the weapons and all the rest of it. And as far as we could work out, there was a lot of carnage. Unfortunate that once the war got to that level, there were always civilians involved and that kind of thing, which was the most unfortunate thing. But we probably eliminated most of that group. The RAR, based in the Mangwende, then established some information that a woman had been taken across into the Mangwende and was on a bicycle, being pushed on a bicycle. So she was probably moving quite fast. Never ever came across her. She was taken out of the country and then popped up in Maputo, where the Red Cross produced her it was the same time as Thomas Wigglesworth and all those other guys, I think. Yeah. Yes. As how well they'd been treated, and of course totally brainwashed and all the rest of it. And she subsequently came back into the country after end of 79, left Zimbabwe, sold her story to Scope in those days. Remember, it's true, I read it in Scope. And sold her story for obviously some money. And who knows where she is to this day. She had out of a that was a sad loss of it was a bad day for the RLI, for 3 Commando that day, losing those 2 guys. But it's true that to that stage of the war, an RLI troopie, he was working very, very hard and in very dangerous circumstances. So my hat always goes off to those guys. And I mentioned them particularly in the book, and when I wrote up Enterprise, I specifically mentioned that, that was those were the guys who really did the graft on the ground. Now that was up Mulligan. Interesting days. And then, I guess then, once we then carried on our own enterprise, ceasefire came, and there was just a corollary, just an interesting thing. The day before Christmas, Christmas Day, I think, was a ceasefire. No, day before Christmas. Yeah. And Majiba appeared at Enterprise Base with a note addressing me by name, saying that the detachment commander wanted to meet me at Lion's Head because he needed transport to get into the Bushu area where they all had to report to, or the ones who were going to report had to go and report to. So I spoke to my guys and I said, guys, look, how do you want? I can handle this. I go on my own. No. He said, we're coming with you. We'll follow you in one of the armored vehicles. And picked up every MAG they could lay their hands on. Didn't have them obvious, but had them down sort of out of sight on the armored, the armored side of the vehicle. And we drove up there, and sure enough, there was another Majiba in the road and stopped me and said, just wait here. I'll call the commander. Then I waited about an hour or so. I had the foresight to chuck a couple of crates of Cokes in the back of my Land Rover. And I waited, and they arrived, and I met him and spoke to him. And we sort of sat down the road and had I need trucks to, so I said, can I get on the radio? He said, yeah, but I'm going to stand right next to you and listen to exactly what you're saying. So through the relays, I said, he said, how many men have you got? He says, I need 11 trucks. So I said, oh, you've got a lot of men. He said, yes. So I got on the radio, relayed through to Salops, and I said, right, this is what we need. They said, well, we're going to have to send the trucks from Bandura around to pick the guys up. It's going to take another 2 hours or so. You're just going to have to wait there. So in the meantime, we said, and I said, look, I've got some Cokes here. He says, no, I'm not drinking your Cokes. They're probably poisoned. So I said, okay, well, you show me one and I'll drink one. And my guys will drink one. And if they don't fall down dead, then you're pretty sure that they're not poisoned. He said, yeah, well, I have to be careful. I said, I understand completely. He pulled a couple out. We drank them. They looked at us for a while, and then they climbed in and drank all the cokes while we waited for the trucks to come down. It was interesting because our guys, the troops I had with me, had climbed out of the vehicle, and all the insurgents were armed, all carrying their AKs or SKSs or whatever with them. We were unarmed, but close to our vehicles. So eventually the group sort of, it wasn't the whole lot, but about 30 or 40, all came clustering around and talking, and it was quite a lot of them spoke good English, asking what weapons, and I want to see a machine gun. So one of the guys said, okay, I'll show you a machine gun. So he brought an MAG out the back of the truck like this and showed it to the guy. It didn't have a belt on it, obviously, so the guy didn't get concerned. And he said, those are the things we are really frightened of. I said, oh, okay. So that was a good point. He said, that gun, we hate that gun, because that makes us very frightened. So it wasn't a jolly occasion, but it certainly was. The tension diffused very quickly. Then the trucks arrived with a New Zealand contingent of peacekeepers who had big eyes at the number of, first of all, the number of people that they were moving. And secondly, they were clearly having a difficulty communicating and even comprehending what was going on here. And here was the Rhodesian security forces with the insurgents all standing in the middle of the road drinking cokes. The lieutenant, I saw him once afterwards, he blew his mind. He said, I couldn't believe that. Anyway, they climbed in the trucks and off they went. And we returned. It was dark by then. We returned to Enterprise, and I guess that was the end of that. So a fascinating period.
Hell of a story, Mike. Hell of a story, and you've covered a very interesting series of events, I must say. Thank you very much indeed. It's a
pleasure.
It's good to have that all on the record.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's in that little book that was published by Skippy with Michelle, who actually was on Op Enterprise with me. He was an RLI medic.
Okay.
That's where we met, and
right.
Yeah, he lost a leg subsequently.
Say again?
He lost a leg, not through a military whatever. It was a carcinoma that had to have his leg chopped off.
Oh, sure.
So his own book he's written is called Out on a Limb, which is a play on obviously being one-legged.
Okay.
Unless he wanted a couple of comments, he's not going to be great, but a couple of little visual aids here, which are in the book. I was talking about the Police Reserve Air Wing aircraft.
Yes.
If you can see that clearly.
Well, Mike, we must put those up when we put this out there. I'm going to ask you to send some images across to John.
Right.
But let's talk about that. I'm going to end the recording, and then we can carry on chatting. But thanks a hell of a lot for your time, Mike.
It was a very interesting time that needed to be told to people, because a lot of people didn't, as Ian Bates says in his introduction, a lot of people didn't even know about it.
Well, yeah, you're right.
Severity.
And I'm one of those people who, although my brother actually was involved with that RLI Fire Force, so I should know more about it. And having lived in that area as long as I did, I know there was a lot going on there, but I didn't. There was a lot I learned from you today that I didn't know as far as the background's concerned, and it's been most interesting. So, thanks very much indeed.
Okay, only a pleasure.